The massive doors of the Grand Assembly Hall slid open with a deep rumble that echoed through the chamber. Ambassador Dong Ho walked slowly down the central aisle, his simple gray uniform looking plain among the colorful robes and strange clothing of the other delegates. His face showed no emotion, but inside he felt tired. Very tired. He had been coming to these meetings for 20 years now. 20 years of listening to aliens complain about everything humans did. 20 years of being told that humanity was too emotional, too quick to act, too dangerous to be trusted with important decisions. The hall was enormous, big enough to hold 10,000 beings from across the galaxy. The ceiling stretched up so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. Hundreds of different species sat in their assigned sections, each area designed for their specific needs. The fish-like aquarians sat in water-filled tanks. The rock-like silicoids needed special heated platforms. The energy beings called luminites floated in containment fields that sparkled with different colors. Dong Ho took his seat in the human section. Next to him sat Captain So Jin, the head of human colonial defense. Her left eye had been replaced with a cybernetic implant after a battle with space pirates 5 years ago. The artificial eye glowed softly blue as it processed data from satellites and ships across the galaxy. She was younger than Dong Ho, only 35, but she had already seen more combat than most soldiers saw in their entire lives. On Dong Ho's other side sat Dr. Min Su, the human science advisor. He was a thin man, with gray hair who spent most of his time studying alien technology and trying to find ways for different species to work together. His hands moved constantly, either taking notes or working on small devices that helped translate between the many languages spoken in the council. The council chairman, a tall blue alien called Thex Moran, stood up at the center podium. His voice was deep and carried easily through the huge chamber. Today we discuss the recent actions of the human delegation regarding the colony world of Theta 7. Dong Ho's jaw tightened slightly. Here it came again. Another lecture about how humans were wrong to help people in trouble. A Veltari delegate rose from the aquatic section. Quintel was one of the most vocal critics of humanity in the council. His tentacles waved in the air as he spoke, a sign of anger among his people. The humans have once again violated the sacred protocols of non-interference. Without permission from this council, they sent medical ships to Theta 7 to evacuate civilians during the plague outbreak. Murmurs spread through the assembly hall. Many delegates nodded in agreement. The sacred protocols were ancient laws that said no species could interfere in another species' problems without getting approval from the entire council first. The process usually took months, sometimes years. They acted without proper authorization. Quintel continued, his voice getting louder. They disrupted the natural order of events. How many times must we tell them that emotional decisions lead to chaos? So Jin's cybernetic eye flickered faster, processing incoming messages from human ships and colonies across the galaxy. Dong Ho noticed her hand move to her communication device, then stop. She was waiting for something. A delegate from the crystalline hegemony stood up next. These beings looked like walking diamonds, their bodies made of living crystal that reflected light in beautiful patterns. When they spoke, their words came out as musical notes that were translated into other languages by machines. Perhaps it is time to formally restrict human expansion rights, the musical voice said, until they learn proper civilized conduct. More nods from around the chamber. The Manthari delegation, insect-like beings with 4 arms and compound eyes, clicked their approval. The Zephyrians, proud bird-like creatures with golden feathers, ruffled their wings in agreement. Dong Ho had heard all this before, many times. When humans had stopped a war between 2 minor species, they were told they interfered too much. When humans shared medical technology that saved millions of lives, they were accused of disrupting natural selection. When humans offered food aid to starving colonies, they were criticized for creating dependency. Dr. Min Su leaned over and whispered, "The plague killed 3,000 people while we waited for council approval to send help. By the time they finished debating, the entire colony would have been dead." Dong Ho nodded. He remembered the desperate messages from Theta 7, men, women, and children dying from a disease that human medicine could easily cure. The local government had begged for help, but the council wanted to form committees and study the situation and debate the proper response. So humans had acted. They sent medical ships and evacuated the sick to human hospitals. They saved 90,000 lives in 2 weeks, and now they were being put on trial for it. An Andromedan delegate spoke next. These aliens looked almost human, but their skin was pale blue and they had no hair. The humans continued to ignore our wisdom. We have been traveling between stars for thousands of years before humans even learned to make fire. Yet they act as if they know better than all of us combined. The chairman called for order as the debate grew louder. The human delegation will now present their defense. Dong-ho stood up slowly. His legs felt heavy, like they were carrying more weight than just his body. Around him, hundreds of alien faces turned to watch. Some looked angry, others curious, a few seemed bored. None looked friendly. Honored delegates, Dong-ho began, his voice calm and clear. Humanity has served on this council for 47 standard years. We have contributed our resources, our knowledge, and our lives to maintain galactic peace. He paused and looked around the chamber. In the Aquarian section, tentacles waved with impatience. In the energy being area, lights pulsed in patterns that meant disapproval. In the crystal section, musical tones rang out in harmony, but not a pleasant one. We have shared our medical technology freely, Dong-ho continued. Human doctors have saved billions of lives across the galaxy. Our ships have defended trade routes and protected peaceful colonies from pirates and raiders. Our diplomats have helped settle disputes between species that had been fighting for centuries. A few delegates shifted uncomfortably. This was all true, and everyone knew it. Human medicine was the most advanced in the galaxy. Human soldiers were among the bravest and most effective. Human diplomats had a gift for finding solutions that worked for everyone. But it appears, Dong-ho said, his voice growing slightly harder, that our definition of civilization differs fundamentally from yours. The chamber grew quieter. Something in Dong-ho's tone had changed. Captain So-jin sat up straighter in her chair, her hand moving to her communication device again. You call it wisdom to let people die while committees debate, Dong-ho said. We call it murder. You call it proper procedure to watch children starve while bureaucrats study nutrition reports. We call it evil. You call it civilized conduct. To ignore cries for help because the paperwork hasn't been filed correctly. We call it cowardice. Angry sounds erupted from around the chamber. Delegates stood up, waving tentacles and wings and crystalline appendages. The chairman banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Dong-ho waited for the noise to die down, then continued. For 47 years we have tried to work within your system. We have filed reports and waited for approvals and followed your precious protocols. And while we waited, people died. Dr. Minsu's hand moved to a device hidden under his jacket. His fingers pressed a sequence of buttons that would send a coded message to every human ship and colony in the galaxy. The message was simple. Come home. We thought we could teach you that compassion and quick action save lives, Dong-ho said. We thought we could show you that sometimes the right thing to do is more important than the proper thing to do. We were wrong. So-jin's cybernetic eye was now flashing rapidly as encrypted communications flooded in from across human space. Military commanders, colony governors, research station directors, and trading ship captains all confirming the same thing. They had received the message and were beginning immediate withdrawal. You want us to be more like you, Dong-ho said, looking directly at the most vocal critics in the chamber. You want us to think before we act, to consider all possibilities, to follow proper channels, to let logic override emotion. He paused, and for the first time since the session began, he smiled. It was not a warm smile. Very well. As of this moment, humanity will no longer act on emotion. We will no longer rush to help people in trouble. We will no longer ignore proper procedures to save lives. We will no longer interfere in situations where we have not been specifically invited and authorized. The chamber had gone completely silent. Even the translation machines seemed to have stopped humming. In fact, Dong-ho continued, We will no longer participate in this council at all. Humanity formally withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. All treaties and agreements between humanity and council member species are hereby terminated. The silence broke like a dam bursting. Delegates jumped to their feet, shouting in dozens of languages. The chairman banged his gavel so hard that it cracked. Security guards moved toward the human section but stopped when they saw Captain Sojin's hand resting on her sidearm. "You cannot simply leave," shouted the Velthari delegate. "There are procedures. There are treaties." There are. The message arrived at Research Station Kepler 442 exactly 6 hours after Ambassador Dong Ho finished speaking at the council. Dr. Yu Jin was working late in her laboratory, studying tissue samples from a new species of plant life, when her computer chimed with an incoming priority transmission. She recognized the encryption code immediately. It was from Earth Command, classification level Alpha 1. Only the most important messages used that level of security. Yujin entered her personal authorization codes and waited for the message to decode. When the text appeared on her screen, she read it 3 times before the meaning sank in. All human personnel are ordered to begin immediate withdrawal from non-human territories. Evacuate all human-developed research, technology, and materials. Destroy any data that cannot be transported. Departure deadline 72 hours. Yujin sat back in her chair, staring at the message. She had been working on Kepler 442 for 8 years, conducting research alongside scientists from 12 different species. The station was one of the galaxy's most important biological research facilities, studying how different forms of life could work together. Her laboratory alone contained 40 years of research into alien plant biology. She had developed new medicines, improved food production methods, and discovered ways to help different species survive in each other's environments. The work was her life's passion, and now Earth Command wanted her to destroy it all. A soft knock on her laboratory door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Clixandra entered the room. The Manthari scientist was Yujin's closest research partner, and despite their very different biology, had become a good friend over the years. Clixandra had 4 arms that moved independently, compound eyes that could see in multiple directions at once, and a chitinous shell that changed color based on her emotions. Right now, the shell was showing pale blue patterns that indicated confusion and worry. "Yujin, there are strange reports coming from across the galaxy," Clixandra said, her voice translated through a small device attached to her throat. "Human ships are leaving their positions everywhere. Research stations are going dark. What is happening?" Yujin looked at her friend and colleague. They had worked together for years, sharing discoveries and solving problems that neither could have handled alone. Clixandra had saved Yujin's life during a laboratory accident 2 years ago, and Yujin had helped Clixandra through a difficult personal crisis when her family back home had rejected her for working with aliens. "Humanity is leaving the council," Yujin said simply. Clixandra's shell shifted to deep purple, a sign of shock. "Leaving? But why? Humans are some of our most valuable council members. Your medical knowledge alone has saved billions of lives." Across the galaxy, Yujin stood up and began gathering her personal research files. "The council decided that humans are too emotional, too quick to act. They said we cause more problems than we solve." "That is ridiculous," Clixandra protested. "Human research has advanced galactic science by centuries. Human diplomats have prevented countless wars. Human doctors have cured diseases that we thought were impossible to treat." "Try telling that to the council," Yujin said, beginning to delete files from her computer. Each deletion felt like losing a piece of her soul, but her orders were clear. "Wait," Clixandra said, moving closer. "You are destroying the research? But that work belongs to all of us. We developed it together." Yujin paused, her finger hovering over the deletion command for a particularly important file about cancer treatments. "The basic research was done by human scientists using human funding and human resources," she said. "We shared it freely, with everyone. But if the council thinks human contributions are worthless, then they won't miss them when they're gone." She pressed the button. Decades of cancer research vanished from the computer's memory. Clixandra's shell turned bright red, a sign of distress. But people are dying from these diseases right now. Without this research, millions will suffer. Then maybe the council should have thought about that before they decided humans were too dangerous to be trusted, Yujin replied, continuing to delete files. Meanwhile, hundreds of light years away, Captain Jaewon was docking his cargo vessel, New Seoul at Cosmos Plaza, one of the galaxy's largest trading hubs. The station was a massive structure that spun slowly in space, creating artificial gravity for the thousands of beings who lived and worked there. Jaewon had been trading at Cosmos Plaza for 15 years. He knew every merchant, every customs official, every security guard. His ship was welcome at any dock and his credit was good anywhere on the station. But today was different. Today he had received the same message as every other human captain in space. Come home and bring everything useful with you. Jaewon made his way to the trading floors, where beings from across the galaxy bought and sold everything from rare metals to exotic foods. The Talarian merchants with their 6 arms juggled multiple transactions at once. The gaseous nebulans floated in pressure suits, trading in energy crystals that their species could digest. The machine-like synthetics calculated prices with mathematical precision. Jaewon, called out Brektar, a Ursinian trader who looked like a cross between a bear and a lizard. Good to see you, my friend. I have some excellent quantum processors from the Rigel system, perfect for human ships. I'll take them all, Jaewon said without hesitation. Brektar's face showed surprise. All of them? That's 3,000 units. It will cost you nearly 1,000,000 credits. I'll also take every hyperdrive component you have, every rare earth element, and every piece of advanced manufacturing equipment, Jaewon continued. Now Brektar looked worried. Jaewon, that's enough material to build a small fleet. What are you planning? Just business, Jaewon replied, transferring the credits from his account. He was spending humanity's accumulated council credits as fast as possible. Once the formal withdrawal was complete, those credits would probably be frozen or confiscated. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy as human traders made massive purchases, draining their accounts and buying up strategic materials. Within hours, the prices of certain key technologies began to rise as humans bought everything available. At the same time, in the Outer Rim territories where space pirates and raiders constantly threatened peaceful colonies, Admiral Hai Young was implementing Protocol Omega aboard her flagship, the Incheon. The Outer Rim was a dangerous place, full of asteroid fields and nebulae where criminals could hide. For 30 years, human warships had patrolled these areas alongside vessels from other species, keeping the trade routes safe and protecting vulnerable colonies. Admiral Hai Young's fleet consisted of 43 ships, from massive battleships to fast patrol vessels. They worked closely with Zephyrian air squadrons, crystalline energy weapons platforms, and Manthari surveillance networks. Together, the Allied forces had reduced piracy in the Outer Rim by over 70%. Ma'am, reported Commander Jinwoo, her second-in-command. We're receiving panicked transmissions from our Allied commanders. They want to know if the withdrawal order is real. Hai Young looked at the tactical display showing the positions of all Allied forces in the sector. Red dots marked known pirate bases. Green dots showed patrol routes. Blue dots indicated protected colonies. Without the human ships, there would be huge gaps in coverage. Pirates would have free access to dozens of systems. Colonies that had lived in peace for decades would once again face constant threats. Send a message to all Allied commanders, Hai Young ordered. Inform them that human forces are withdrawing from Council operations effective immediately. They are welcome to attempt to cover our patrol routes with their own ships. Ma'am, Jinwoo said quietly, the Zephyrian commander is asking if this is some kind of joke. He says his forces can't possibly cover the additional territory. Then perhaps he should have considered that before supporting the Council's decision to restrict human operations, Hai Young replied. The most shocking withdrawal of all was happening on the medical stations scattered throughout the galaxy. These facilities had been humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization, providing advanced medical care to any species that needed it. Dr. Taemin had spent his entire career developing nanomedical techniques that could repair damage. At the cellular level, his work had saved billions of lives and had been freely shared with medical professionals across the galaxy. The techniques required specialized equipment and years of training to use properly. He was packing that equipment when his Zephyrian colleague Dr. Kesarali found him in the laboratory. "Taemin, what are you doing?" Kesarali asked, her golden feathers ruffled with concern. "There are patients in the intensive care unit who need nanomedical treatment. Without this equipment, they will die." Taemin continued carefully packing the delicate nanoassemblers into protective cases. "I'm following orders from Earth Command. All human medical personnel and equipment are being withdrawn." "But the plague on Zarian Prime," Kesarali protested. "We were supposed to begin treatment next week. Without human nanomedicine, the death toll will be catastrophic." Taemin paused in his packing. The Zarian plague was indeed terrible, killing thousands every day. Traditional alien medicine had proven completely ineffective. Only human nanomedical techniques could stop the disease. 72 hours after the humans walked out of the council chamber, Chairman Thexmoran called an emergency session. The massive assembly hall felt different now, empty somehow, even though thousands of delegates filled the seats. The human section sat vacant, its simple gray chairs looking strangely out of place among the elaborate seating designed for other species. Thexmoran had been chairman of the Galactic Council for 15 years. He had overseen trade negotiations, territorial disputes, and scientific collaborations. He had managed the delicate balance of keeping hundreds of different species working together peacefully, but he had never faced anything like this. "Honorable delegates," he began, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. "We are here to discuss the current crisis caused by humanity's sudden departure from the Council." Crisis. The word felt inadequate. In just 3 days, reports had been flooding in from across the galaxy. Trade routes were failing, border defenses were collapsing, medical emergencies were going untreated. It was chaos on a scale that the galaxy had not seen in centuries. The Velthari delegate Quintel rose from the aquatic section, his tentacles moving in agitated patterns. "This is madness," he declared. "They cannot simply abandon their responsibilities and leave. There are treaties. There are obligations." "Perhaps someone should have mentioned those obligations before voting to restrict human activities," came a dry comment from the Ursinian section. The bear-like delegate Graktar had always been neutral in council debates, but now his tone carried an edge that hadn't been there before. Quintel's tentacles flashed with anger. "We were trying to bring order to their chaotic methods. Human, emotional decision-making has disrupted galactic affairs for decades, and now their absence is disrupting it even more," pointed out Dr. Veltara from the Scientific Consortium. The elderly scientist's multiple eyes were focused on a datapad, showing the latest reports. "Our preliminary analysis indicates that humanity controlled significant portions of galactic infrastructure." She activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. The image showed the galaxy with different colored lines, indicating various systems and networks. Human contributions were marked in blue. The amount of blue was staggering. Humanity provided 31% of all medical technology used by Council species. Dr. Veltara continued. 28% of military logistics and defense coordination, 47% of deep space exploration equipment, and 73% of all translation and communication protocols between species. A shocked silence filled the chamber as delegates stared at the display. Many had known that humans contributed significantly to galactic civilization, but seeing it laid out in hard numbers was overwhelming. "There's more," Dr. Veltara said grimly. Human linguistic experts were the primary translators for 14 species who had no other way to communicate with the rest of the galaxy. Human diplomats were mediating 43 ongoing territorial disputes. Human medical research was the basis for treatments used by every single council member species. The crystalline hegemony's representative chimed a series of notes that the translation system rendered as, "This cannot be accurate. No single species could be so integral to galactic civilization." "The data is verified," Dr. Veltara replied. We've been so accustomed to human contributions that we stopped noticing how dependent we had become. Commander Zexakira of the military coalition stood up in the strategic section. The insect-like warrior's compound eyes reflected the light from the holographic display. The military situation is even worse. Human forces were providing security for over 200 systems in the Outer Rim. Without their patrol ships, piracy has already increased by 300%. Murmurs of concern rippled through the assembly. The Outer Rim territories were vital for trade and resource extraction. If pirates could operate freely there, it would affect the entire galactic economy. Furthermore, Zexakira continued, human tactical doctrine and training methods were used by allied forces throughout the galaxy. Many of our combined defense strategies simply cannot function without human participation. The Manthari delegate clicked her mandibles nervously. What about the communication networks? We're already having difficulty coordinating our forces without human translation algorithms. Dr. Veltara nodded. Human linguists developed the universal translation protocols that allow us to communicate across species barriers. Many of these systems are failing without human maintenance and updates. In the energy being section, the Luminite representative pulsed with patterns of light that indicated deep concern. The translation system converted the light patterns into speech. Our energy distribution networks relied heavily on human engineering expertise. Several systems are already showing signs of instability. Chairman Thexmoran felt a growing sense of dread as the reports continued. Each delegate who spoke revealed another critical system that had depended on human involvement. The scope of the crisis was becoming clear, and it was far worse than anyone had imagined. The Aquarian delegate Merdala spoke next, her watery voice bubbling through the translation system. Our underwater colonies are experiencing life support failures. Human environmental engineers designed most of our atmospheric processors. Without their expertise, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood. Entire populations were at risk. But the most devastating report came from the Zephyrian medical officer, Dr. Kesrali, who had traveled to the council station specifically to address the assembly. Honorable delegates, she began, her golden feathers dulled with exhaustion. I come to you from the Zerion plague zone. The situation there is catastrophic. She activated her own holographic display, showing images of overcrowded hospitals and mass burial sites. The pictures were difficult to look at, but she continued speaking. The plague has now killed over 50,000 beings in the past week alone. Traditional treatments have proven completely ineffective. Only human nanomedical techniques could stop the disease, but all human medical personnel have been withdrawn. Dr. Kesrali's voice began to break as she spoke. We have thousands of children dying every day. Entire families are being wiped out. The death toll is climbing exponentially, and we have no way to stop it. The chamber fell silent except for the soft sounds of various species expressing grief in their own ways. Crystalline beings played soft, mournful notes. Energy creatures dimmed their light. Aquatic species released chemical signals that indicated sorrow. We tried to contact human medical authorities, Dr. Kesrali continued. We begged them to return, at least temporarily, to help with the plague. Do you know what they told us? She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates who had voted to restrict human activities. They said that according to the Council's own ruling, human medical intervention constitutes emotional interference that disrupts the natural order. They suggested we file a formal request through proper channels and wait for committee approval. The irony was crushing. The same bureaucratic delays that humans had been criticized for ignoring were now preventing any help from reaching the plague victims. How long would the approval process take? Asked Chairman Thexmoran, though he already suspected the answer. Minimum 6 months, Dr. Kesrali replied. More likely a year, assuming no delays or objections. By then, everyone on Zerion Prime will be dead, said the Manthari delegate quietly. The horrible truth of the situation was becoming clear to everyone in the chamber. For decades, they had criticized humans for ignoring proper procedures and acting too quickly in crisis situations. Now they were discovering why humans had ignored those procedures. People were dying while committees debated. The Technological Union's representative, A cybernetic being called Next Core provided the final piece of devastating news. Our economic analysis indicates that without human participation, galactic GDP will drop by approximately 40% within the next year. Trade networks that took centuries to build are already beginning to collapse. 40%? Gasped the Trade Federation delegate. That's a conservative estimate, NextCore replied. It assumes we can maintain current operations despite the loss of human logistics, engineering, and coordination. If we cannot, the cybernetic being paused. The economic collapse could trigger system-wide conflicts as species compete for reduced resources. Chairman Thex Morin felt the weight of leadership crushing down on him. In his desire to maintain order and proper procedures, the Council had driven away the species that made galactic civilization possible. We must contact Earth immediately, declared the Velthari delegate. Surely they can be reasoned with. Surely they understand that people are dying. We've tried, Thex Moran replied wearily. All communication attempts to Earth have been blocked. Their quantum communication networks are no longer accepting Council transmissions. What about individual human colonies? Suggested the crystalline representative. Also blocked. It appears that humanity has completely severed all official communications with Council species. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in galactic history, an entire species had simply walked away from interstellar civilization. And that civilization was discovering just how much it had depended on the species it had driven away. 6 months after humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council, the galaxy was burning. The first war had started in the Rigelian border region, where 2 minor species had been arguing over mineral rights for decades. For 30 years, human diplomats had managed to keep the dispute peaceful, arranging compromises and trade agreements that satisfied both sides. Without human mediation, the argument had escalated within weeks. The quarry claimed the Tectons were stealing from mines that rightfully belonged to them. The Tectons insisted the quarry were trying to expand beyond their legal territory. Neither side would back down, and neither side trusted the other enough to accept mediation from Council diplomats. The first shots were fired on a Tuesday. By Friday, both species had called in their allies. The quarry had defense treaties with the Bellicose Confederation. The Tectons were protected by the Mineral Workers Union. Within a month, 17 different species were fighting across 12 star systems. Admiral Sectara of the Bellicose Fleet surveyed the wreckage of what had once been a peaceful mining station. Debris floated in space where thousands of workers had once extracted rare metals needed for starship construction. Now the station was destroyed, the workers were dead, and both sides were claiming victory. This is madness, her tactical officer observed. The humans would never have let it get this far. Sectara nodded grimly. Human peacekeepers had a talent for seeing conflicts before they turned violent. They would have stationed ships in the system, provided neutral arbitration, and found a solution that worked for everyone. But the humans were gone. The war spread as other species chose sides or tried to protect their own interests. Trade routes that had been stable for centuries became battlefields. Neutral stations found themselves caught between opposing fleets. Entire systems were evacuated as the fighting spread, and this was just one of the conflicts that had erupted across the galaxy. The crystalline hegemony and the plasma collective had resumed their ancient rivalry, a hatred that went back thousands of years. Human diplomats had spent decades building trust between the two species, arranging cultural exchanges and joint research projects that had slowly healed old wounds. Without human involvement, old suspicions had quickly returned. A minor trade dispute had escalated into accusations of espionage. The accusations had led to the expulsion of diplomats. The expulsions had triggered military buildups. The military buildups had led to the first hostile encounters in 50 years. Now crystalline energy ships and plasma battlecruisers were fighting across the spiral arm, their exotic weapons turning entire solar systems into deadly radiation, zones that no other species could safely enter. Similar conflicts were erupting everywhere humans had once served as peacekeepers or mediators. The galaxy's most emotionally driven species, it turned out, had also been its most effective peacekeepers, but the military conflicts were not the worst of the galaxy's problems. On Zerion Prime, the plague continued to spread. Dr. Kesserali stood in the main hospital of the planet's capital city, surrounded by the dying. The hallways were packed with patients lying on makeshift beds. The medical staff worked around the clock, but they could do little more than make the victims comfortable while they died. The death toll had passed 2 million and was climbing every day. Traditional Zephyrian medicine could slow the disease's progress but couldn't cure it. Only human nanomedical techniques had proven effective against the plague virus, and all human medical personnel had been withdrawn 6 months ago. "Doctor," called Nurse Felrian from across the crowded ward. "We're receiving another transport from the outer settlements. 300 more patients." Kesserali closed her eyes in despair. The hospital was already beyond capacity. They had set up treatment areas in every available space, including the parking structures and maintenance tunnels. 300 more patients meant 300 more people they couldn't save. The Zephyrian government had finally swallowed its pride 2 months ago and sent desperate messages to human space. They offered formal apologies for their role in humanity's expulsion from the Council. They offered trade concessions, territorial agreements, anything humans might want in exchange for medical aid. The response had been swift and devastating in its simplicity. A single human medical ship had arrived in Zerion space 3 weeks ago. The vessel was painted matte black with no identification markings except for a small Earth flag on its hull. It had broadcast a single message to the planet's government before taking position in orbit. Dr. Kesserali remembered every word of that message, delivered by a calm human voice that showed no emotion. "The human medical ship Mercy offers treatment for the Zerion plague. Our nanomedical facilities can cure the disease completely. Treatment will be provided free of charge to any Zephyrian citizen." Hope had flooded through the planet's population. Millions of plague victims had celebrated, believing their salvation had arrived. Then came the conditions. "Treatment is contingent on the following requirements," the message had continued. "First, the Zephyrian government must issue a formal public apology to the Galactic Council for their role in restricting human medical activities. Second, the government must acknowledge that human emotional medical practices are superior to traditional Zephyrian logical approaches. Third, the government must request that the Galactic Council formally recognize human medical authority in all future plague situations. The demands were humiliating for a proud species like the Zephyrians. For 3 days the government had debated while people continued to die. Finally, faced with the complete extinction of their species, they had agreed to all conditions. The apology had been broadcast across the galaxy. The Zephyrian Prime Minister had stood before cameras and admitted that human medical practices, which they had once called emotionally compromised, were in fact more effective than any alternative. He had begged the Galactic Council to formally recognize human medical authority and to invite humanity back to the Council with full medical autonomy. Within hours of the broadcast, human medical teams had landed on Zerion Prime and begun setting up treatment facilities. Their nanomedical devices worked like miracles, curing patients within hours who had been dying for months. But the humiliation of the apology had cost the Zephyrian government its credibility. Anti-human protests had erupted across their territory. The Prime Minister had been forced to resign. The species was cured but politically shattered, and it was just the beginning. The Technological Union was facing complete system collapse. Their computer networks, which controlled everything from traffic systems to life support on space stations, had been designed with human assistance over decades. The humans had provided not just technical expertise, but also the creative problem-solving needed to integrate systems from dozens of different species. Without human technical support, the networks were failing. Minor glitches were cascading into major system crashes. Space stations were losing life support. Planetary communication networks were going dark. Transport systems were malfunctioning, stranding millions of travelers. The Union's chief technology officer, a cybernetic being called Prime Node 7, had sent increasingly desperate messages to human space. The first messages had been polite requests for technical assistance. Then they had become offers of payment for human expertise. Finally, they had become pleas for help to prevent mass casualties. The human response had been as humiliating as their medical conditions for the Zephyrians. Human technical teams would return to restore the failing systems, but only after the Union publicly admitted that their logical approach to system design was inferior to human, emotional engineering methods. The admission had been broadcast 3 days ago. Prime Node 7 had stood before the Union's governing council and stated that human emotional intuition was superior to cybernetic logical analysis for solving complex, technical problems. Human repair teams were now working around the clock to restore the Union's failing networks, but the political damage was severe. Half the Union's member species were in revolt, refusing to accept that their logical approach to technology was flawed. The pattern was repeating across the galaxy. Species after species was discovering that they couldn't maintain the systems and networks that humans had helped build. And each time they asked for help, the price was the same: a public admission that human methods were superior. The Manthari Collective was begging for human diplomatic assistance as 3 of their neighbor species prepared for war. The condition was an acknowledgement that human emotional diplomacy was more effective than Manthari logical negotiation. The Aquarian Commonwealth was requesting human environmental engineers to fix their failing underwater cities. The price was admitting that human intuitive design was better than Aquarian methodical planning. The bellicose confederation needed human military advisors to deal with the spreading conflicts. The cost was recognizing that human emotional decision-making in battle was superior to traditional military logic. But the most shocking development was happening in the Outer Rim, where humanity had once provided security against pirates, and Raiders Admiral Hai Young stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Incheon, watching long-range sensors track a convoy of merchant ships under attack by Andromedan raiders. The merchants were calling. 1 year after humanity's dramatic exit from the Galactic Council, the most important diplomatic mission in galactic history approached Earth. The ship carrying the Council delegation was the finest vessel the galaxy could produce, built with technology from a dozen species and equipped with every luxury that galactic civilization could offer. Chairman Thexa Moran stood at the viewport, watching Earth grow larger as they approached. The blue and white planet looked peaceful from space, giving no hint of the Industrial Revolution that had transformed human civilization in just 12 months. Beside him stood representatives from every major species in the galaxy. The Velthari, Delegate Quintel, whose tentacles now moved with nervous patterns instead of the confident gestures of a year ago. The crystalline representative whose harmonic tones had grown subdued. The Zephyrian medical officer Dr. Kessa Raleigh, whose golden feathers had never fully regained their luster after the humiliation of begging for human aid. "Look at those orbital stations," observed Dr. Veltara from the Scientific Consortium, pointing at the massive structures surrounding Earth. "They've built more industrial capacity in 1 year than most species develop in a century." The human orbital facilities were indeed impressive. Huge shipyards constructed vessels of purely human design. Research stations bristled with advanced sensors and communication arrays. Manufacturing platforms produced goods that were now in high demand across the galaxy. But most impressive were the defense platforms, powerful weapons arrays that could protect Earth from any conceivable attack. The message was clear. Humanity was no longer defenseless, no longer dependent on galactic protection. "They're completely self-sufficient now," murmured the Manthari delegate, her compound eyes tracking the movement of human ships throughout the system. "They don't need the galaxy at all." That was the terrifying reality that had driven the Council to this desperate diplomatic mission. In just 1 year, humanity had proven that they could not only survive without the galactic community, but actually thrive. Human colonies had expanded rapidly, no longer constrained by Council regulations. About territorial expansion, human technology had advanced at an unprecedented rate, free from the committees and oversight that had slowed progress for decades. Human trade networks had grown to rival those of species that had been spacefaring for millennia. And most importantly, human military power had grown enormously. The independent human fleets that now patrolled the Outer Rim were larger and more advanced than anything the Council could field. The galaxy needed humanity, far more than humanity needed the galaxy. Their ship was escorted to Earth orbit by a squadron of human fighters, sleek vessels that moved with deadly grace. The human pilots were polite but firm in their communications, directing the Council ship to a specific docking bay and warning them not to deviate from the assigned flight path. The delegation was transported to the surface in a simple shuttle, very different from the elaborate ceremonial vessels they were accustomed to. The human pilot, a young woman named Lieutenant Hana, treated them with professional courtesy, but none of the deference that Council members usually received. They landed at New Geneva, the city that had become the capital of human space. The buildings were clean and functional, built with efficiency rather than grandeur. There were no massive monuments or elaborate displays of wealth. Everything seemed designed for purpose rather than show. Ambassador Dong Ho met them at the landing pad, accompanied by the same two advisors who had walked out of the Council chamber a year ago. Captain So Jin now wore the uniform of the Human Space Defense Force, a military organization that had grown from nothing to become one of the galaxy's most powerful forces. Dr. Min-Soo carried a data pad that undoubtedly contained detailed analyses of every Council member species' strengths and weaknesses. Dong Ho himself had been promoted to Secretary General of Human Space, making him effectively the leader of all human territory and operations. But he still wore the same simple gray uniform, still carried himself with the same quiet dignity that had characterized him as a Council delegate. "Welcome to Earth," he said simply. No elaborate greetings, no ceremonial speeches, just a straightforward acknowledgement of their arrival. Chairman Thexmoran had prepared a long diplomatic speech about the importance of renewed cooperation and mutual understanding. But looking at Dong Ho's calm, patient expression, he abandoned the flowery language and spoke directly. "You know why we're here?" Dong Ho nodded. "You want us back." "The galaxy needs stability," Thexmoran replied carefully. "Without human participation, we've seen conflicts escalate, systems fail, and populations suffer. The data is clear. Galactic civilization functions better with human involvement." "Without human compliance, you mean?" Captain Sojin interrupted, her cybernetic eye glowing softly as it processed security data from around the planet. "You want our ships to fight your wars, our doctors to heal your people, our engineers to fix your problems, our diplomats to solve your conflicts, but you want to dictate the terms." Dr. Min-Soo activated his datapad, projecting holographic statistics into the air between the two groups. In the past year, galactic military casualties have increased by 400%. Economic output has dropped by 60%. Plague deaths have exceeded 10 billion beings. Medical system failures have affected over 200 worlds. Technological breakdowns have disabled critical infrastructure on 57 major space stations. He paused, letting the numbers sink in. "This is what the galaxy looks like without what you called emotionally compromised human involvement." The alien delegates shifted uncomfortably. Every statistic was accurate, and everyone represented massive suffering that could have been prevented with human involvement. "We understand now that we were mistaken in our assessment of human methods," admitted the crystalline representative, her harmonic tone subdued with what seemed like shame. "Your emotional approach to problem-solving has proven more effective than our logical deliberations. Your quick action saved lives that our careful procedures would have lost," added the Zephyrian delegate. "We have learned this at great cost." Dong Ho listened to their admissions without satisfaction or gloating. He had taken no pleasure in watching the galaxy suffer, even if that suffering had proven humanity's value. "The question," he said quietly, "is what you've learned from this experience. Do you now understand that different approaches to problems can be equally valid, or do you simply want to use human effectiveness while maintaining your own authority?" The silence that followed was telling. Several delegates looked uncomfortable, unwilling to admit that they still saw humans as useful tools rather than equal partners. The Velthari delegate Quintel spoke first, his tentacles moving in patterns that indicated reluctant honesty. "We have difficulty accepting that our traditional methods may be flawed. Our species has used logical, methodical approaches for thousands of years. And they work well for many situations, Dong Ho acknowledged. But not for all situations. The galaxy is complex enough to require multiple approaches to different problems. Dr. Kesarali stepped forward, her golden feathers still dulled by the memory of her species' humiliation. What are your terms for rejoining the council? Dong Ho smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. We're not rejoining the council. The statement hit the delegation like a physical blow. They had expected negotiations, demands for better treatment, perhaps requirements for formal apologies. They had not expected complete rejection. But the galaxy needs... Chairman Thexmoran began. The galaxy needs human participation, Dong Ho interrupted. It does not need the Galactic Council. Captain Sojin activated a holographic display showing the current state of galactic affairs. 17 major conflicts are currently being resolved by human mediators. 43 plague outbreaks are being treated by human medical teams. Over 200 infrastructure failures are being repaired by human engineers. Hundreds of trade disputes are being arbitrated by human commercial courts. All of this is happening without council involvement, Dr. Minsu added. Individual species and governments are contracting directly with human authorities for services they need. The implications were staggering. Humanity was providing all the essential services that the galaxy required, but they were doing it independently, outside the council system entirely. You're replacing the council, the Manthari delegate said quietly. We're providing what the council couldn't. Dong Ho corrected. Effective solutions to real problems. And if we refuse to accept this new arrangement? Asked the Aquarian representative, bubbles of anxiety rising through the water in her containment suit. Captain Sojin's cybernetic eye glowed brighter. Then you continue as you have for the past year. We've proven that humanity can survive and prosper without galactic approval. Can you say the same? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Every delegate knew the answer. Without human involvement, their civilizations were struggling. Trade was down, conflicts were up, technological progress had slowed, and medical advances had practically stopped. Humanity had become indispensable, and they had done it by simply being themselves. What exactly are you proposing? Chairman Thexmoran asked. Dong Ho gestured toward the simple conference room where they were meeting. Humanity operates